Hey everybody, I want to talk to you a little bit today about IMO 2020. This is a very large change that is happening to our industry, something that is going to affect your business one way or another. I want to give you a little bit of insight of what is IMO 2020 and some of the expectations you can have from it. So what is IMO 2020? IMO 2020 is a rule geared towards cleaning up shipping emissions. Their goal is that they are going to reduce the sulfur content in the fuel that's consumed by these ships, and that the sulfur content is going to be dropped by 85%. That's their goal. That's the number they're giving, is 85%. This all kicks off January 1st, 2020. So this is a pretty big change. And it's a big change in a lot of ways that might not seem apparent at first. So the number one thing we're excited about as people is that we're trying to make the world a better place. So this does mean that lower sulfur fuels being burnt, which is what they want, means you're going to have less pollutants going into the air or being jammed into the ocean. So this is a good thing, especially when you take into account, and this is the most important thing of all, is that for perspective in 2017, that the entire marine sector consumed 3.8 million barrels of oil a day, which is about half of the entire global demand. This is the biggest consumption of oil out there. It's ships. It's these monster ships that move cargo around the world, and it's one of the biggest ways we move cargo. So it's kind of still it's like a culture unto its own. It's got this whole life cycle of how stuff moves, and this consumes most of the oil in the world, half of it. So now, what does this mean to you or to the industry you're in? If you're in the industry, if you're in the shipping industry, or if you're in the marine industry, what this means is you can only use these compliant fuels. There's a couple other ways you can get around it with some scrubbers, but these are all tens of millions of dollars of cost per ship. But the idea is you have to use the IMO sulfur regulated fuels. And really what this is going to do for the ocean line companies, Maersk, Hapag, Evergreen, all these big ocean line firms that own these ships, it's just going to cost more money. It means that the shipping lanes have the potential to change just based on where the refineries are and where they're going to be able to get the consumption of this new type of low sulfur fuel. And ultimately that cost is going to have to be given to somebody, and somebody's going to have to pay for it, because the marine company is not doing a charity. So it's interesting, actually. Goldman and Sachs put out a report on this, and they believe that in a full compliance scenario, so if everybody actually truly complies with this, which is obviously the goal, that's the IMO's goal, they estimate that the cost to the consumer, so you got to remember, if the marine company's got to pay, that usually means you, the consumer, me, the consumer, are one day going to have to pay for this. And Goldman Sachs estimates this at a range of around $240 billion. Big B, billion. Huge, huge, huge amount of money that is going to be consumed by IMO 2020. So it's important to know that this is a cost that we're all going to feel one way or another. It's not going to be probably massive. It's going to be subversive. It's going to be like little tiny bits and pieces that you're going to start seeing change. But it's going to create a much more difficult environment for people who heavily rely on imports. So what does this mean to your business? Well, if you actually do heavily rely on imports, this is going to be a pretty significant impact, simply because they look at the OECD, which stands for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. They estimate that the impact of what this is going to do is going to have about a $5 to $30 billion impact on container shipments. This represents anywhere from 20 to 85% increase in the fuel price change for people importing goods. That's a significant number when your whole livelihood in terms of your business is built on importation of goods. So it's important to note that the ocean lines have notified a lot of the manufacturers ahead of time, saying we don't necessarily know what the cost is going to be, but we know how we're going to handle the cost. So if you go to Maersk's site, you go to Hapag's site, they will give you what and how they're going to measure things and how they're going to bill out. But the thing that a lot of manufacturing shippers are yet to know, and if you're a manufacturing shipper, you probably already know this, is you don't really know what the cost is going to be. So you might have a metric in what you can gauge by or forecast by, but you don't really know what it's going to be. So that's the number one thing. The second thing, and maybe the less in-your-face cost, is going to be the supply and demand that's going to affect diesel fuel in the sense of road diesel. So every truck you see out there, for the most part, if it's a commercial vehicle, it's running on diesel, and by a large majority is running on diesel. And a lot of commodities traders have looked at this market. In fact, when we were doing our research, we found that the commodities traders almost have a better grasp of this because they're so into what fuel trades at and how it's going to affect, and the supply, the demand, where it's going to be, what they almost have a better understanding of what this is going to be, and they're very, very vocal about the cost that diesel fuel is going to increase, because diesel fuel is basically the basis of what they start making this other sulfur fuel for these marine use. And they got to get the distillates right and do a couple other things. But at the end of the day, they are the average commodity trader in this market knows a good deal about this, and they're most concerned about the diesel fuel supply and demand for road diesel. And a couple things they said, but one most important for you and for me when in terms of cost, is that they expect that the domestic over-the-road shipping cost increase in diesel fuel is going to be, some estimate in the 10 to 20% range, but some estimate all the way up to the 100% range. So if you got diesel fuel running at $2.80 a gallon, whatever it is today, that means it's $5.60 a gallon for the same diesel fuel because of IMO 2020. The goal for this video, the goal that I want to leave with, or the hope that I hope you understand here, is that IMO 2020, it's coming, regardless if you cry about it, whether you're upset about it, it's coming. Doesn't matter, it's coming. It's going to affect us, it's going to affect costs. The number one thing we can do is be prepared. We want to help our shippers, we want to help our customers understand what this is to them, understand what it's going to do to their pricing. If you have done an RFQ in the past, and 2020 is coming around and you're using old rates, make sure when you're budgeting, when you sit in your budgeting meeting, especially in the new year or whenever you set your budget, that you understand that IMO 2020 is going to have an impact, and it might not be just on your imports. It could also be on the fuel costs associated with all of your transportation of your goods. So if you have goods with baked in costs of transportation, make sure you take that into account, where the transportation portion might have to get bumped up a little bit to cover the diesel fuel costs, which in most cases fuel runs at about 20 to 25% of the cost of the total transportation. So if you kind of work backwards from there, you can kind of understand where you're at. I hope this has been insightful. I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions on IMO 2020, what this means for your business, please reach out. You can always email us. You can always leave a comment below, call us. Whatever your best form of medium is to get a hold of us, please do so. In the meantime, have a great day. Let us know if we can help.